In less than a year, Israel fought Iran twice. Two direct confrontations, the 12-day war in June 2025, and a major escalation in early 2026 that pushed Israeli pilots into Iranian airspace and Israeli planners into entirely new strategic territory. Now Israel has approved one of the largest fighter jet expansions in its history, a fourth F-35 squadron, a second F-15 squadron, and a fleet that could eventually approach 100 of the most advanced stealth fighters on the planet. This isn't routine procurement. This is a country that has been to war, recently, repeatedly, and is now spending accordingly. Here's what that actually means. Let's start with the budget, because nothing else makes sense without it. Before October 7th, Israel's annual defense budget was under 100 billion shekels, roughly 27 billion US dollars. That number has risen sharply since then, with additional long-term military allocations reportedly planned across the coming decade. Israeli officials describe it as the most significant force modernization effort in the country's modern history, and the centerpiece of that modernization is combat aviation. In May 2026, Israeli procurement authorities approved two new fighter squadrons simultaneously, a fourth squadron of F-35 IADIRs from Lockheed Martin, and a second squadron of F-15 IAs from Boeing. If both programs are completed as planned, Israel's long-term F-35 fleet could approach roughly 100 aircraft, while the F-15 IA fleet would roughly double from 25 to 50. For years, Israeli defense planners debated which platform to prioritize. The F-35 offers stealth and survivability in contested airspace. The F-15 offers larger payload capacity, longer range, and the ability to carry heavier munitions. Recent conflicts with Iran appear to have ended that debate. Not by picking a winner, but by making both financially and strategically necessary at the same time. That's a significant shift, and the budget for the first time makes it possible. The aircraft at the center of this expansion is the F-35 IADIR, Israel's heavily customized variant of the American F-35, and one of the most extensively modified versions of the platform in the world. Unlike most operators, Israel successfully negotiated the right to integrate its own domestic technology directly into the jet, including locally developed electronic warfare systems, advanced avionics software, and other classified modifications tailored to Israeli needs. While the full extent of these changes remains classified, Israeli officials have consistently described the IADIR as meaningfully superior to the baseline F-35. By 2025, the fleet had accumulated thousands of operational flight hours across multiple active theaters: Iran, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza. Israeli reporting has frequently described the IADIR as central to strikes targeting Iranian radar networks and air defense infrastructure across 2025 and 2026. There are also reports, difficult to independently verify, that Israeli engineers adapted the aircraft during the conflicts to expand its external payload capacity for JDAM munitions, potentially increasing available strike options at some cost to stealth characteristics. What can be said with confidence? Israeli officials and defense analysts have argued the IADIR is particularly well suited for operations against advanced integrated air defense systems, including Russian-designed platforms like the S-300 family. How it performs against those systems in detail remains classified, but the expansion plans suggest Israeli leadership believes the aircraft has proven itself and wants more of them. But this buildup didn't happen overnight. Israel joined the F-35 program in 2010. The IADIR reached operational status in December 2017. By early 2026, most of the first 50 aircraft had been delivered to Nevatim Air Base, with remaining deliveries expected later in the year. A 2023 agreement added another 25 aircraft, a third squadron, with deliveries expected later this decade. The newly approved fourth squadron would come on top of that, pushing the eventual fleet toward roughly 100 aircraft total. Even under current plans, reaching that number will take most of the decade. These are long procurement timelines, but the direction is now clearly established, and the budget to sustain it is in place in a way that wasn't true before October 7th. The F-35 expansion doesn't exist in isolation. Israel still operates aging F-15s and a large fleet of upgraded F-16s, platforms that will remain in service for years. Rather than replacing them wholesale, Israeli planners appear to be building a mixed force structure: stealth aircraft for penetrating contested airspace, heavy strike fighters for large payload missions, upgraded legacy platforms for sustained operations, aerial refueling to extend reach, and increasingly integrated autonomous systems across all of it. In January, Israel reportedly approved additional upgrades for parts of its F-16 fleet. Earlier agreements secured Boeing KC-46 tanker aircraft designed to extend long-range strike range significantly. All of this falls under what Israeli defense officials call the Shield of Israel framework, a long-term modernization effort that encompasses air defense, autonomous systems, sensors, networking, and expanded multi-domain strike capability. It's an integrated vision, not a collection of individual purchases. The F-35 expansion is the most visible piece of it, but it's one part of a much larger picture. Israeli political and military leadership have been unusually direct about what's driving these decisions. Defense Minister Israel Katz explicitly referenced what Israeli officials call Operation Roaring Lion when discussing the expansion plans, arguing that recent combat validated the investment in air power. Prime Minister Netanyahu put it more bluntly: Israeli pilots could reach anywhere in Iran's skies if necessary. Israel and Iran have now engaged in multiple direct confrontations within a short time frame. Current procurement trends make clear that Israeli leadership is not treating those confrontations as resolved. They're treating them as evidence of what future conflicts may look like and building accordingly. The logic is straightforward. If you've already been there twice, you plan for the possibility of going back. Israel is now on a trajectory toward one of the largest F-35 fleets outside the United States, backed by significantly higher defense spending, a second expanded F-15 squadron, and a modernized legacy force that's being upgraded rather than retired. Israeli officials describe the Adir's wartime performance as the justification for all of it. And based on the procurement trajectory, that argument has clearly been accepted at the highest levels of government. Whether this level of investment produces the deterrence Israel is seeking, or whether it simply reflects a new baseline for a country now permanently in direct confrontation with a regional power, is the harder question, one that won't be answered by procurement decisions alone. What's clear is that the scale of the commitment and the speed at which it's moving reflects a military and political leadership that believes the last 2 years were not an exception. They were a preview,